Well, hello everybody, Max of Maxis Models here. Today I wanted to talk about the B-17G that is on display at the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force in Pooler, Georgia, near Savannah. This particular airframe, as they point out, is not the original airplane. It is, however, a real B-17G. But before I tell its story, I thought I would give a quick background on the original City of Savannah. The original City of Savannah was the 5,000th B-17 to be processed through Hunter during World War II. The reason that the processing center was at Hunter in Savannah is where the 8th Air Force was born. This is where it was initiated. This airplane is not the 5,000th B-17 made, nor is it the 5,000th B-17 made after the attack on Pearl Harbor. That airplane was called 5 Grand. It is often overlooked that 5 Grand was the 5,000th B-17 made after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Somewhere between 130 and 200 B-17s already existed at the time of the attack at Pearl. It is often said that the original City of Savannah was shot down on its 13th mission, but that's not actually correct. The crew to the original City of Savannah was shot down on their 13th mission, and the tail gunner was killed, flying another B-17, Bureau number 42-97542. It appears that the original City of Savannah had some engine problems while it was being flown across the North Atlantic. Some reports say that it had to stop in Iceland, others say it made it all the way to England, but either way, the crew was separated from the airplane at that point, and they went on to fly other aircraft. The actual City of Savannah herself did survive the war. She lived to come back to the United States, but unfortunately, despite some efforts to save her, she was scrapped. The airplane that now resides at the museum was built in Long Beach by Douglas Aircraft on contract to Boeing. She was rolled out 5 days after the end of hostilities in Europe, accepted by the United States Army Air Force on the 20th of June 1945. 2 days later, she was flown to storage in Syracuse. That October, she was declared excess and sent over to Altus Army Air Force Base for disposal. There she sat for 2 years under the War Assets Administration, and that's when some rather colorful characters get involved. While mustering out of the service after the war, Rudy Froschla, and I hope I'm saying that name correctly, was getting his separation papers at Lackland Air Force Base when he saw a table off in the corner that had all of these used airplanes listed for sale. This was at a War Surplus Administration desk. You could get a B-17 for $350, but it could only be used as a monument or for educational purposes, not as a flying aircraft. Rudy's brother Ferd had come back from the war shortly after that, and Rudy told him about the opportunity to purchase the plane, and that if they could get it, he'd be willing to fly it back to their hometown of Hazen, North Dakota, from Altus, Oklahoma. Rudy had been a B-17 bomber pilot in the war, so he knew how to fly a B-17. The Hazen School Board decided they'd like to have the airplane as a memorial, so they managed to scrape up to $350 and bought the airplane. By this time, Rudy was getting ready to leave for medical school, so they got another former World War II pilot, Lyle Benz of Hazen, to fly the airplane back for him. The engines had been pickled, so it took them some time to get them ready to operate. There were no radios left in the airplane, so they'd be flying without any radio or nav aid communication, which meant going strictly VFR. Unfortunately, when Benz flew the airplane back, the weather started getting bad, so they had to divert into Perry, Oklahoma. They set the B-17 down, and the brothers decided to go ahead and make their way back to North Dakota via land. They also had to raise more money for gas and oil before getting the giant airplane back. The number 3 engine lost a lot of oil, so they had to fill it back up after refueling. They got the airplane to Dickinson, where they parked the plane, until the day Hazen, North Dakota was celebrating their arrival. When they showed up in Dickinson, though, the number 3 engine was smoking badly, and the local police were right at the airport to make sure they were okay. They knew they were going to lose the oil anyway, Rudy later wrote, so they added more oil before they departed for Hazen a few days later. I mean, hey, that's a radial engine, right? It was a nice calm day when the Benz brothers soared over Hazen and landed on a pasture on top of the hill. Some people claim they landed on the town's main road, but that is not according to the recollection of the pilots. Apparently, the local airport was too small, so they found a large pasture. Unfortunately, the grass was a bit too soft. The plane nosed over and bent one of the propellers. The whole town had showed up, so they had no trouble getting locals to help them get it back on its tail wheel. It was then towed to the school parking lot where it sat for a couple of years. No one seems to have any recollection of the airplane actually being used for educational purposes. It was more of just a memorial, but after a few years of sitting in the sun, it was decided it needed to go, and this is where another person comes into play. Rudy had since become a doctor and was treating a man who was a crop duster pilot who'd been in an airplane accident. This man would wind up being the man who flew the plane out of Hazen. Apparently, he knew where there were some people that might be interested in a B-17 down in Florida. He and some of his people came out, got the airplane in flyable condition. He had the local town blacksmith, Herman Mayer, pound out the dents so the propellers were at least safe to operate, if not aeronautical perfection. Luckily, they said Herman was a meticulous guy. This man and his assistant spent several days getting the airplane ready to take off. So the airplane had been at Hazen from 1947 to 1951 when they took off and flew it to Florida, where it was registered to California Atlantic Airways in St. Petersburg. The intent was to use it for aerial photography. Although never used for that purpose in the United States, the people in Florida had the airplane for 2 years before they sold it to a Canadian operator. Apparently, they could not use it in the United States because it had been sold as an educational or memorial, not as an operating aircraft. And even though it had been bought from the government still had the ability to enforce those rules. The aircraft was registered to California Atlantic Airways, but they did not have an actual title to it. The way they got around this was to sell it to a company in Canada in 1953. Kinting Aviation of Toronto, Canada bought it, got it registered in Canada, and the Canadian government issued them a title. The airplane flew for several Canadian operators, Kinting Aviation, then in 1957 Photographic Survey Corporation, also of Toronto, then in 1960 the Hunting Survey Corporation in Toronto, in 1962 back to Kinting Aviation in Toronto, and then in 1968 to Kinting Limited, probably just a corporate name change, and then in 1969 to Kinting Aircraft, again, probably just a corporate name change. In April of 1971, it was sold to Arnold Kolb, DBA Black Hills Aviation, in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Now, here's an interesting little twist. It had been Air Force serial number 44-83814, but when it went into civilian registration as a monument/instructional platform, it was given the civil registration November 66571. Of course, it could not be flown beyond the ferry flight, so when it went to Canada and got a new title, it was registered as Charlie Foxtrot Hotel Bravo Papa. But when it came back to the United States with the Canadian title, it was given a U.S. title and re-registered again as November 66571, but now they had a title and could operate the airplane in the United States. So the fellows who sold the airplane to Canada had found a way around the government restrictions, and when it came back, apparently no one noticed or cared, so they were able to get clear title 20 years later on it. Arnold Kolb of Black Hills Aviation found the perfect dodge. It was converted into a fire tanker and operated by Black Hills Aviation from 1971 to 1974. After 1974, the company was simply named Black Hills Aviation, and they flew it up through 1980. In 1981, they traded it to the National Air and Space Museum for a couple of Lockheed P-2Vs, with plans by the National Air and Space Museum to make it part of their collection. Unfortunately, they were running out of space, so in 2009, it was given to the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force, where a restoration process on it began to turn it into a replica of the City of Savannah. This, of course, is where it is today. Okay, I hope that wasn't too confusing. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that little story on the City of Savannah and on the B-17, currently on display at the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force. Take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful day. And as always, model on.